Both Souls worlds have things in common. Selfish figures chasing their goals at all cost, the fan favorite, the annoying one, poison swamps, and list goes on. If both settings are so similar in world building, which one is actually the stronger of the two? Now this is more of a fun little question since you can't really compare two separate worlds. It is similar to how internet compares their favorite characters, but there will always be this guy hitting you with an actually my favorite fiction is more powerful than your favorite fiction because of this reason, because of that reason, whatever. In Soul's universe, main fight is never about powerful beings challenging each other, and fights always come down to bigger themes such as existence and freedom. This is not a video about who would win in a head-to-head battle. In a world where Marika and Gwyn existed together, we all know they would team up. In this video I will explore the main similarities and differences of both worlds, and by the end of the video you will know enough about each faction to decide which one holds a greater potential. So let's start with the first topic. When considering the power scale, there are too many variables, so you can't really look at each setting and say one is stronger than the other. On the technical side, Dark Souls Trilogy is smaller in scale, but it is more related to the limitations that came from being the older titles. But when we compare characters side by side, there are more similarities in power than you might expect. In Elden Ring, there's Malenia, legendary sword master who leveled an entire continent, so by default she is stronger than any character in the universe of Dark Souls, right? But then there is Gravelord Nito in Dark Souls, a powerful soul who rules over death and disease. He destroys continents with his miasma of death during the war against immortal dragons. If you put their boss fights side by side, the difference in difficulty is day and night. It is obvious which one is stronger. But then again, in lore Nito also destroys continents, he is immune to diseases, and the concept of mortality doesn't exist to him. Both factions face powerful dragons at one point in their history, they both defeat dragons as big as mountains, and they both befriend dragons to an extent with minor differences. Most ancient dragons of Dark Souls are weak to lightning, but unlike Elden Ring dragons, they are immune to toxic poisons and decay, so they both come with their own weaknesses. They are more similar than they seem in the gameplay. But the main difference comes from the title Gods and Demigods. In Elden Ring, gods actually exist. Outer gods such as Formless Mother influence and bless their followers, and in addition to the already existing outer gods, there are Empyreans who can actually rise to divinity and become true gods and goddesses. Queen Marika, one of the Empyreans, has the plot of shattering the Elden Ring to break free from the influence of the gods and ascend as one true goddess. Michaela tries the same thing with a slightly less effective plan. Malenia, during her fight against Tarnished, blooms for the second time and becomes a powerful vassal of Scarlet Rot, and her defeat triggers the third and final bloom, which will truly make her a goddess of Rot. And then there are demigods such as Godwyn and Morgoth, legendary warriors who hold the power to challenge godly beings, but their titles come from their lineage rather than the divine powers they don't possess. Elden Ring in this aspect is already a step ahead of Dark Souls, since the concept of divinity is more of a symbol in the world of Dark Souls. But then again, more gods existed in Lordran than Lens Between has ever seen, but in the world of Dark Souls, all life is abandoned to their doom. There are no true gods like outer gods from Elden Ring. Here, divinity is a title claimed by those strong enough to take it. Originally, there were 4 powerful souls that gave godly powers to their host. Soul of Light is one of them. It is what made Gwyn a self-proclaimed god. After the first gods, Nameless King rose as the god of war. Then there was Alma, god of blood, Keita, goddess of tears, Finna, goddess of love, Velka, goddess of sin. In the absence of true gods, powerful beings held the title of divinity to create order amongst men. Gwyn and his family declared themselves to be gods in order to ensure the continuity of their age. Main difference is that in Elden Ring, gods control every single living being. Without the approval and the will of the true gods, nothing can exist, but in Dark Souls, life exists in a world it shouldn't. There are no true gods, no divine help, or no prophecies. Life in Dark Souls fights against all odds to continue existing in a world they shouldn't. In a direct comparison, Elden Ring's true gods are superior to the false ones of Dark Souls. However, when Lord Souls are combined in one shell, they possess power of everything ever existed in the whole universe of Dark Souls. Divinity and all the existence in Dark Souls is the fragments of one powerful being scattered across the whole universe. So in a battle of gods of Elden Ring against the demigods of Dark Souls, winner is clear. Elden Ring characters hold a clear advantage over the false gods of Honor Londo. Power scale in Elden Ring is much more complicated than you might expect. Two of the strongest warriors in Lands Between were mortals before they earned their ranks among demigods, so even though Radahn is powerful enough to hold stars, Godfrey can still wipe the floor with him. Godfrey, as a mortal, can defeat eternal giants, and he is Marika's chosen champion against Elden Beast. Malekith can challenge death without any power on his side, and he can still defeat an Empyrean wielding god-slaying powers. So titles don't really matter in Souls universe. So who would be the winning faction if the greatest warriors of Lands Between and Lordran clashed? Marika's immortal Tarnished army seems to have a massive advantage over Gwyn's Slave Knights and Black Knights. However, Tarnished are not fully immortal, and their resurrection is only guaranteed by Marika if their soul can safely return to Erdtree or the nearest Grace. Deathblight is the kryptonite of Tarnished, and just so happens Immortal Dragon Seed the Scaleless can spread the curse of death with his crystals. It is essentially the same curse as Deathblight, so straight away Seed can seal the immortality of Tarnished, but there's one minor issue. Seed is the weakest of the ancient dragons. If the crystal granting him immortality is somehow broken, Seed doesn't have the strength to challenge demigods and the dragons of Golden Order. There is Nito, who is immune to all mortal concepts. He can't be poisoned and he can't rot. He controls death and disease, so he's a perfect warrior to challenge Malenia, right? But another minor issue rises. Even though Nito is immune to Malenia's disease, he is not a skilled warrior. Even if he were to somehow survive against Malenia, being the vessel of death, Nito is the natural prey of Malekith. So even if he has the powers to control death, he isn't skilled enough to defend himself against legendary warriors such as Malekith and Malenia. Against Godfrey, there's only one person who can meet him in the battlefield. In his peak, Vendrick held the power of the old gods. On top of holding the souls of life, death, light, and the dark, Vendrick also defeated the giants. But there can be no clear winner between Vendrick and Godfrey based on their achievements from the past, since Dark Souls 2 Giants seems weaker than Elden Ring ones, but with the most powerful souls of his universe, Vendrick holds godly powers, and potentially with all 4 souls collected in one body, Vendrick was more powerful than even Gwyn himself, but that's until he lost his sanity. So Godfrey and Vendrick would cause the most devastating duel in the battlefield, but it is hard to decide which one would eventually come out as the victor. I'm leaning towards Godfrey in this clash, but it is hard to tell really. Golden Order has ancient dragons as their allies, so it is directly a massive advantage over Age of Fire. Gwyn's army only has one ancient dragon, Dark Eater Midir, but sadly he is weak to lightning. So despite being incredibly powerful, he would have a difficult time against ancient dragons such as Fortisax and Placidusax. Concept of darkness doesn't really exist in Elden Ring, so it is impossible to know how ancient dragons of Elden Ring would react to corrupting darkness of Midir. On the surface, Placidusax and Fortisax would win this encounter thanks to their lightning, but Lordran still has one wild card when it comes to dragons. Sadly, this dragon's size and powers aren't properly displayed in Dark Souls 1 due to the limitations of the time, but Calamite may even be the strongest dragon ever existed in Lordran. His obsidian scales are immune to lightning, fire, and magic, so ancient dragons of Lands Between could never overpower Calamite with their red lightning or their fire. To put Calamite's power in perspective, I will give you this one little piece of lore. Even after Gwyn slain the strongest ancient dragons, reaching the size of mountains, and even after lords started hunting dragons as a form of sport, they actively hid and ran away from Calamite. Despite slaying almost every single ancient dragon, they never dared to challenge Calamite. Now Now with all these, we know Calamite is immune to all elements, and his flames also carry the power of darkness, which means Calamite's fire do physical damage on top of fire. And Calamite's center eye gives him telekinetic powers to control his opponents. His Eye of Calamity renders his enemies' endurance useless, which means against Calamite, armor and scales mean nothing, as his attacks will just go through his enemies' defenses. So Calamite seems to be an unstoppable beast, but he has one weakness. His obsidian scales aren't resilient against physical attacks, so he can still be overthrown by forces who possess incredible physical strengths. Characters such as Godfrey would be a serious threat to Calamite. Both factions have incredibly powerful armies, but I believe Dark Souls comes out on top when the regular armies clash. Lens Between has Clean Rot Knights, Banished Knights and Crucible Knights as powerful elite soldiers. Banished Knights may hold back Black Knights for a while, they are just not powerful enough to stop them forever. Then there are Crucible Knights, incredibly powerful elite soldiers. They cannot be stopped by an elite knight regiment from Dark Souls, but here's the issue, there are barely any Crucible Knights, and their numbers are too low to make a real difference. Dark Souls on the other hand has one wild card once again. Abyss Watchers are powerful immortal souls that can destroy any army in their path. You see them as a boss fight in Dark Souls 3, but there's an actual army of Abyss Watchers in Lordran. So if we just consider the armies clashing, Lordran and Dark Souls would come out on top entirely because of the powers they get from Abyss Watchers. Slave Knight Gale is another interesting character that holds powers of countless warriors who lived before him. He could potentially slay demigods such as Morgoth, Mohg and Radahn, since he's one of the most powerful beings of his universe. But his insanity would be a massive disadvantage against real threats. Rykard and Aldrich would most likely have the most disgusting duel in the battle, since they would end up trying to devour each other. But Rykard is a powerful sorcerer and a warrior who lives as an immortal serpent, while Aldrich is only as powerful as the bodies he possesses. Aldrich's weakness to fire and lack of powerful horse would most likely mean Rykard could easily beat him in a duel, but the outcome of devouring Aldrich would be a big mystery. Overall, even though Dark Souls characters directly counter most of the powers of Elden Ring characters, they would most likely end up losing anyway, since they can't match the physical powers and the fighting skills of Elden Ring characters. Another topic is the Tarnished and the Undead curse. Immortality, or I should say resurrection, is the keystone of these universes. In decaying, horrifying worlds of souls, there is no easy way out. Humanity comes back to life again and again after every single disaster until the end of time. On surface, immortality seems similar in both settings, however they are based on incredibly different roots. One world has a much stronger form of immortality, but they both come with terrible downsides. In Lands Between, only a selected group of mighty warriors are immortals. During Marika's ascension, Godfrey leads his army to many tough battles. One by one, every faction falls before Godfrey. His army suffers serious casualties during each clash with the rival forces, but despite growing smaller, Godfrey's army actually becomes more and more powerful as they earn more experience in the battlefield. When the last standing kingdom under the banner of Stormlord falls against Godfrey, war in Lands Between finally ends. Knowing Godfrey and his army can no longer train themselves in the battlefield, Marika sends them to pilgrimage. They are ordered to march across the Badlands and fight in the name of their queen. It is known no army can survive the land across the fog. However, Marika promises the exiles that upon their demise, they will be once again blessed by her grace and they will once again rise. So with their exile, the cycle of Tarnished begins. Marika secretly trains the Tarnished army to rebel against the other gods. In World of Elden Ring, Marika controls the cycle of life, and no matter how many times her puppet army falls, she brings them back over and over again. Within Lands Between, Tarnished are blessed with immortality to serve their queen until she overthrows the other gods. On the other hand, immortality in Dark Souls is reduced to a curse at the hands of Gwyn. When the world was frozen in a still, peaceful age of darkness, powerful souls, scattered across the world were found by powerful hosts. Gwyn discovered the souls of light, while Virtue Pygmy discovered the dark soul. Gwyn claimed most of the light for himself to start an age of light, while Virtue Pygmy used dark souls to create humanity. As Gwyn's light became stronger, shadow it cast also grew. No matter how powerful he became, he couldn't overpower the dark soul. Despite Gwyn's efforts, darkness remained as the true roots of their world. Within darkness, the concept of mortality didn't exist, therefore humans born from Virtue Pygmy's dark souls could never experience mortality. Gwyn was afraid of the everlasting humanity. After all, his light soul constantly craved for more power. To ensure the future of Age of Fire, Gwyn marked humanity with dark sign, which meant those afflicted by the dark sign would feed their souls and humanities to bonfires at the end of their life cycle. This meant humanity was slowly going to reduce to empty shells, hungry for souls. They could never truly die, but each time they fell, they lost a portion of their souls, sanity and humanity. In the world of Dark Souls, immortality isn't tied to a greater being, unlike eldenring. While Tarnished can't resurrect without divinity's blessing, in Dark Souls immortality is the true nature of humanity. However, despite having the stronger form of immortality, their form is reduced to empty shells in order to forever serve and stay inferior to the god of sunlight. Eldenring and Dark Souls have completely opposite approaches to world building. Eldenring is about conquest. Marika, as a powerful Empyrean, takes over Lens Between with ease, and she becomes the true ruler of the continent. She and her family are unmatched in strength, and the only thing that holds them back are the outer gods. By the end of the game, based on the ending you pick, you rebel against the outer gods, and the next part of conquest begins. From this point onward, your heresy towards outer gods and their will is an unexplored territory. In Dark Souls, however, the main plot revolves around survival. In a failed world, even the strongest forces try to survive against a doomed existence. Despite having the title God of Sunlight, Gwyn is just one of many factions constantly fighting to stay on top. Darkness constantly weakens Gwyn's rule as the existence tries to return to its roots. Abyss corrupts all the living beings to start its own age. Chaos struggles to exist, and they are in an eternal fight with the living. In Dark Souls, Gwyn is never the strongest force, but his kingdom fights against all odds to survive in a hopeless world. So, Marika's order defeats weaker factions to become sole ruler, and for the first time ever, forces of Lens Between will challenge an enemy stronger than them in the form of outer gods. Naturally, we don't know yet how Marika will do against a faction straight up stronger. Gwyn, on the other hand, is already an example of a ruler who does nothing but fight against stronger forces, and he always manages to stay on top. So, in a battle of conquerors and the survivors, result is difficult to guess. In conclusion, we can assume that life in Elden Ring grows stronger as they continue fighting, but in Dark Souls, the more they fight and expand, the weaker they become, because the fuel of existence is scattered across more beings. By the end of Ring City, it is implied that all existence eventually comes down to halt, which means all the souls expanding across the world will eventually gather in one host again. A powerful being holding the power of all existence will then have the option to trigger the beginning of a new universe. In a head-to-head battle, Elden Ring characters are stronger of the two, but in Dark Souls, all life comes from 4 powerful souls, which will eventually gather under a single host. So it is your opinion to decide which universe truly holds the stronger power. But this is it for today. If you enjoyed the video, give a like and sub, it helps so much, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.